Are you using these best practices in your process documentation? Your organization has likely gone through great efforts in fine-tuning its processes. However, like many businesses, you may not be dedicating much effort to recording the details within these processes. Whether you simply don't want to spend the time writing down the information, or if you're new to process documentation, we're here to help. I'm Noel, and in today's video, we'll discuss the ins and outs of process documentation, why it's important, the various types, some quick tips, and how to use templates for documentation. Let's go. No matter how many people you have working at your organization, process documentation plays an important role in making sure everyone has all the info they need to successfully do their tasks. Process documentation is a big part of making sure team members stay in the loop of ever-changing processes. One key reason your organization needs process documentation is for knowledge transfer. Most processes are automated, but still require some sort of human intervention. What happens if an employee is sick or away on vacation? Having process documentation available to everyone means processes can continue as usual, even with key team members out of the picture. When it comes to new employees, process documentation is a great tool. Training with process documentation speeds up the onboarding process as newcomers can learn on their own by following the documentation and then reaching out to teammates to fill in any gaps. Setting up documented processes will also help your organization conduct performance evaluations. Having something to coach against, like a written process, makes mentoring and giving direction much easier. Process documentation is super helpful when it comes to operational consistency. Especially within customer-facing positions, you want to provide a consistent level of service and quality to clients no matter who they're working with within your company. By using your process documentation as a guide, the job should be completed the exact same way every time, regardless of which employee is handling the task. Consistency is crucial with not only customer-facing tasks, but also product quality and time savings. When you take the time to write down your processes, you'll really understand how they work. This means getting a better grasp on who's involved in each process, which steps they take, how long it takes them to complete the steps, why certain steps are taken, and the results of the process as a whole. Getting this bird's eye view of your organization's processes will make them more efficient. You can find redundancies and eliminate them, or find inconsistencies and fine-tune them. Ultimately, taking the time to document your processes will save you money and effort in the long run. Although it may seem like spending time honing in on these processes and writing them down would take up time and resources, it's only short term. Instead, in the long term, the company will realize major time and cost savings possibilities. For example, a senior employee may have to train a new employee how to do a process. They can spend the initial time training, and then the new employee can use the process documentation for reference going forward. This frees up the senior employee to focus on their important tasks. No matter which department you're in or what type of organization you work for, the goal of process documentation is the same. Write down the steps of your processes in enough detail that any employee can understand and execute them. And while process documentation is pretty straightforward across all departments and company types, there are some types of process documentation that require certain considerations. In particular, when it comes to the technology space and departments like human resources, there may be some unique needs you should cater towards. Here are 5 types of process documentation that require a little extra consideration. There's IT, software development, quality assurance, human resources, and workflow. With IT process documentation, you'll need to include highly technical details since the audience will also be technical. Include documents that cover compliance rules, tech specifications, and info on asset management to ensure your team can properly oversee the company's technology properties allocated to employees. There are quite a few steps that make up a software development lifecycle, so it's important to take necessary care in including them all. Some different kinds of documentation could include standard operating procedures, details on software products and usage info on how particular systems work, as well as end user info that covers instructions, tutorials, troubleshooting, and more. Similarly, there are several types of quality assurance process documentation. Processes can include test plans like testing schedules and resources, test progress reports, which include important data findings and details, test cases that explain all scenarios that are part of the test plan, and defect reports, indicating issues found during testing, how to reproduce them, and the level of severity. Even if your organization doesn't have a designated human resources team, it likely still follows HR processes, including recruiting, hiring, onboarding, training, performance evaluation, payroll, benefits, and more. The last type of process documentation is workflows. Workflow process documentation includes a series of processes to complete a task. These workflows tend to be documented visually with a flowchart or diagram and are trigger-based, which means employees must complete the steps in order. Documenting your processes doesn't have to be complex, especially when you follow these 12 best practices. Focus on your audience's needs. It's all about the end user. Who are they and what do they need from this process documentation? Write your documentation in actionable terms. Use the active voice to help your audience understand what they need to do. Use plain language. Stick to the facts so the content is clear and actionable. Carefully consider your formatting. Readability is just as important as the content itself. Use links when necessary. Including relevant resources helps readers follow along. Use checklists. Documentation that guides and instructs allows your employees to not miss any important steps. Stay in one lane at a time. It can be tempting to combine processes when they're closely related, but it'll just create more confusion and complexity where it's not needed. Perform frequent updates. Your processes are never final. They're always evolving, and so should your documentation. Incorporate visuals. Some workflows require visual descriptions. Visuals can show how different employees' actions are connected and can make complete instructions easier to follow. Avoid using employee names. It's more logical to use titles instead, and this way, even when employees change positions or leave the company, the process documentation will still apply. Create a style guide for consistency. Creating templates helps keep documentation standardized so anyone can create, read, understand, and follow them. Allow feedback. Once process documentation has been in place for a month, see whether employees notice improvements or if they have any notes to consider. Lastly, I want to share some process documentation quick tips. Lean on the subject matter experts within your organization for specific processes. Create a process documentation team to tackle all your documentation needs. Prioritize consistency across all process documentation. Continually evolve your documentation as processes change and your business grows. Make your documentation accessible to all within your organization. Use process documentation software to make documentation like templates. Using templates helps you standardize your content, ensure complete and accurate information is provided, and helps you easily share final documents with your team. With tools like Jotform's online PDF editor, you can automatically convert form responses into professional PDFs. Creating templated final process documents has never been easier thanks to this tool. Process documentation might seem like a simple administrative task, but it really should be a fundamental part of your organization. Let's review. When you write down or visualize processes, your organization can transfer important knowledge to different employees, improve efficiency, and ensure consistency. Remember these practices when creating your process documentation. Focus on your audience's needs. Write in actionable terms. Use plain language. Carefully consider your formatting. Link to any additional resources as necessary. Use checklists. Stick to one process at a time. Update your processes frequently. Incorporate visuals. Avoid using any employee names. Create a style guide for consistency, and gather feedback. Some quick process documentation tips include using a process documentation software, relying on experts for help, creating a process documentation team, prioritizing consistency, evolving your documentation, and creating accessibility for all. By using templates in your process documentation, you'll be able to standardize your content, ensure complete and accurate information is relayed, and even turn your templates into polished and ready-to-use documents. I'm Noel with Jotform. To stay up to date with all things Jotform, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching.